Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. Thank you so much for joining us as we bring you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Mondays at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m. for our special edition of Tell Me Your Story, and then Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., right following the news, streaming live at those times at richarddugan.com, streaming and also podcasting on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, on YouTube, where you can watch these interviews. We hope that you will, and we thank you so much for tuning into our program. We hope that you'll subscribe. We also hope you'll click notifications so that when I post a new conversation, such as this one, you will be notified. We ask that if you can support the work that we're doing financially, you'd like to be a part of what we're doing, and it's the best way for you to do it since you maybe can't get out and about and do the things that maybe you'd like to do, and I encourage you to do them just the same. We could take any financial support you can give us. We have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. When they ask you for what email to send to, who you're sending this to, whom you're sending this to, richard@richarddugan.com. That's richard@richarddugan.com. And finally, as always, we ask that you take a little time to just pause, go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place, and listen to that still, small voice of guidance and inspiration and encouragement. We hope that you'll do that. The more I do it, the easier it gets. And then there are even times when, as easy as it has gotten, suddenly it's like, no, I don't want to do that. And then I have to think back on my history and go, you know what? It would behoove me to do it. And it won't steer you wrong, I promise you. My friend never steers me wrong. We have a very special guest on our program today. Evelyn Leite, I believe, is MHR LPC. Lots of letters behind Evelyn's last name. Author, speaker who shares her heart-wrenching real life experiences with humor. And she loves to relate funny stories paired with memories about family addiction and mental health to lead women in particular to Jesus. She is highly regarded for her expert knowledge in healing trauma, understanding relationship dynamics, improving communications, and overcoming addictions. I want to thank you so much for joining us, Evelyn. It's a pleasure to have you here on the program.
Richard, I really love your approach. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, thank you. It is wonderful to have you, especially considering the fact that I haven't counted. I want to say maybe 8 books that you've written thus far. That we're not talking about all of them per se, but we're certainly going to dive into your story that does touch upon probably each one of them just the same.
19.
Excuse me, 19. Then I've only scratched the surface on your website. My goodness. One in particular that strikes me that's very interesting is A Search for Sanity, a one step at a time. And of course, if you're with someone who, if you or someone you love are among the 19.4 million people who suffer alcohol or drug addiction, well, this unvarnished, raw recount of various ways and many years that our guest, Evelyn, has suffered, well, this can serve as an understanding and validation that you need. And it seems, and I've said this many times on this program in the last year or two, that of all of the negatives that people talk about when it comes to the lockdown and COVID and so forth, there is a positive. And that is that we are now having these conversations. So if you want to talk about a silver lining, I would say that's it, because people are beginning to realize, and I've done this before. All right, everybody who's listening and watching, who's in therapy, raise your hand. I'm raising my hand, ladies and gentlemen. Because in one form or another, we're all in therapy. This program, for me, is therapy. I actually do have a therapist that I see. Although it's interesting how one gentleman who, comedian who I actually love his humor, Woody Allen, has always talked about his humor, about his therapy. I remember one joke he was telling where he started out, he had a pocket watch, and I need this for my therapy. I find that it's just the stigma. I have to say the stigma. It's like if you have two eyes or two ears or a nose, a mouth, an arm, a leg, etc., then therapy is kind of like an appendage, and it's okay to have that appendage. What do you say, Evelyn?
I say it's wonderful. I grew up in a home that desperately needed therapy, but it wasn't available because we lived in rural South Dakota on a farm. And as you said, therapy was not widely accepted. People who actually did find help did it in the secret way so that nobody would know about it. Lots of shame and embarrassment at not having all the answers. And my course in life has been to open the doors to answers all the questions that are possible that I could answer, to share everything about addiction, everything about self-worth, everything I can about how to love yourself, how to be yourself, how to be bold and stand tall in this world.
And for some, that's really hard to do,
Yes,
even to think about standing
yes,
tall, because they have been dealing with so much of that, of the shame and the embarrassment and so forth. Um, what are some of the? First of all, I want to go to your website, which, by the way, folks, is Evelyn Leite. That's EvelynLeite.com. On your website, when people go to the homepage, they're actually going to see the majority of your books right there on the front cover on the homepage. But you start out with this one, women. What do we want? Changing your life is easier than you think. Create the life you've dreamed of. Get the love you want. Now that is one of your books. Am I not correct?
yes, it is.
Women, what do we want?
Yes, it is.
What is it that you see? Because you and I probably, and again, I'm not guessing the age. I know better than that. But you and I have been around for a while. I will say I'm 64, and I have seen very subtle changes that frustrate the bejesus out of me, because I still don't understand how it is even possible for an employer to pay two different people, male and female, two different salaries for the exact same job. I still, that still boggles my mind. When it comes to medicine, the majority of tests that have been done, the majority of studies and so forth over the years, maybe not so much now in the 21st century, but it is changing, have been done on men, and all of that information has just basically, well, this applies to both men and women. But not only are men and women different biologically, but every woman is different biologically. But talk to us first about your perceptions of how the role of a woman in our particular society here in the United States, how you've seen it change, or maybe you haven't seen it change, since you maybe have been observing.
Well, Richard, I grew up in the 50s, and women were to be silent, just like children, to be seen and not heard. They didn't have any rights. When I tried to buy something on my own, I either had to have my father sign for it, or when I got married, I had to have my husband sign that. Not, but I couldn't because I was a woman. I went for a job at one point, and they said there was a big sign in the window, manager needed, and it's been there for weeks. So I went in and I said, I would like to apply to be the manager. And this guy laughed at me. He laughed at me. We don't hire women. You could maybe be a clerk if you want to, or you can sweep the floor. And then that's kind of been the story of my life from the beginning, is fighting my way out of that. And what that does to your self-esteem really is very debilitating. And so women have to fight not only, and not now they don't have to fight nearly as much, but younger women don't realize how much we fought to get things that they are now enjoying.
Mm-hmm.
In the 70s, when I was in college, it was during the burn your bra days. I joined, of course, because I was anti-establishment at that time. I was also anti-God. And part of that was the family I grew up in. One thing that really happened when I was 9 years old, there was a bad fire at our house, and it started with a clothes rack by a pot-bellied stove that my mother had hung diapers on. And my mother carried this clothes rack out to a snowbank and burned herself all up and down her front and was in the hospital for a month. And when I saw this happen, I'm witnessing it. When I see it, I thought, I don't want to be a woman. Their lives are too hard. I am not going to ever learn how to can or sew or do woman things. Their lives are just too hard. And so from there, I have been fighting, well, for everything that my brothers could do, and I had 6 of them, I made sure I could do better.
Well, I grew up in a family of 6, 2 older sisters, 2 younger sisters, and a brother. So I sort of kind of can relate to the reverse of that. Now we had the usual sibling stuff going on, but we never put each other down in that respect. I mean, we did have a certain level of respect beyond the sort of the sibling rivalry. I mean, it was always, I had 2 older sisters. So when I went to school as the eldest male, it was always, oh, you're Jeanette's brother, you're Cecilia's brother, So I had to find a way to make my own way. And it sounds to me like that is what women have had to do for so long. And unfortunately, they're still doing that. One of these days, I got to believe one of these days that glass ceiling is going to break. And it will be no more, I hope. And I'm wondering, considering we now have, and I believe it is only our 2nd presidential nominee who is a woman. I'm just curious as to if you think that has made and or will make any difference if, and I'm just putting that out there, if she were to be our next president, not our next female president, not our, and I know they'll say that, just like they said about Barack Obama, first Black president. It's like, and a commentator said once, we haven't come very far because we're still using that terminology. He was the 44th. Okay. He was the 44th. She may be the 46th, 47th. So I'm curious as to what you think, not so much about the political aspects, but about the aspects in terms of gender, in terms of women making the strides that they are certainly entitled to have as members of our society.
I have lots of mixed thoughts about that. For one thing, as you say, it's definitely pointed out that she's a woman. And so there's been token women for the last 30 years, token women in top jobs. And I'm sorry to say, I believe she's a token woman at this point. I believe that a bunch of men got together and said, we need a token woman, and they picked her. I could be wrong. But that's what I've seen over the years, is the token women.
How do you get around that, though? Is there a way? I mean, because the way you're phrasing it, it sounds like as long as it's the old boys club, It's not going to change.
Well, don't get me started on emasculation. Because I have 3 sons, and I have really seen the detriment that the public TV and various things have done to our men.
Mhm.
And I certainly don't like that. Of course, I'm praying for a day when everybody is equal and you're not defined by your color or your sex, but by your character. And with that, I'm paraphrasing Martin Luther King, but I really, really would love to see that.
Yeah. It would be nice. It would be nice. I will of course use his phrase, being judged by the content of your character when it
Mhm.
comes to some of our political figures. And it's like, I wouldn't hire that person to be dog catcher, and yet these people are putting him in that position of a power and control and authority. I just don't get it. It makes no sense to me.
The way it makes sense to me is that we live in a power-based society.
Mm,
Everything is based on power,
mm,
and everybody wants the power. There's an incredible amount of greed, and greed exists because money is power. And you know, Jesus didn't value money. He said, give to God what's God and give to Caesar what's Caesar's.
yep.
But he didn't value the collection of money. And I believe that our values are, for the most part, all wrong.
Yeah.
That everybody wants power. And I think they put a lot of these people in office who simply do not have the qualifications because it's easier to have power over people if there are no qualifications.
Yeah.
If they're dumb, if they don't know what they're doing, if they're willing to follow suggestions.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know the same can be said too when it comes to tokens, when it comes even sometimes when talking about race.
Yes.
I'm frustrated by that aspect of the hiring in business, because you have to hire certain different nationalities in order to be diverse. And it's like, okay, I don't have a problem with the concept of diversity, but is that person really the best person for that job? And again, I don't want to go too far down this, we'll call it the rabbit hole, but it just seems to me like there is no common sense, there is no logic, and I think it goes back to your point. And if we're going to bring in the Ten Commandments, they're in violation of one of the first five, because money is more important than anything else, and that's why much of what happens in this country, both politically as well as economically, it's all about the money. Instead of
Yes.
about you and me as people. It's all about, it needs to be about family. It needs to be about community. It needs to be about relationships, which is what you are talking about throughout your books. Not only Search for Sanity, One Step at a Time. There's also another one. I love this because I remember hearing a Dr. Leo Buscaglia, you might remember. They referred to him as the love doctor back in the 70s and 80s. And he
Yeah.
told the story about how he was talking with somebody and asked him, "So how you doing?" "Fine." "No, no, really, how you doing?" I'm fine." And that's the title of one of your books. Just fine, thank you. And we're not being honest with others, and especially with ourselves, which is where the whole aspect of our mental health conversation comes in. And it's not a question of you're not being able to be fine, right? It's a question of recognizing I'm dealing with some challenges right now and I need some
When
help.
I was a child, my mother would always say, they'd say, "How you doing, Edith?" And she'd say, "Just fine, thank you." And so I learned to do that also.
Mm,
But at home, my father was an alcoholic, and we were hungry some days, although not very many. We did live on a farm, so we were covered in that respect. but we didn't have any money. We didn't buy school clothes. We didn't have running water. We didn't have electricity. There were a lot of things we didn't have. And yet, anytime the subject came up, we were always just fine. And when I wrote my first book, it really blew the cover off of our family's secret, and that really created a lot of problems. I mean, my family still accepts me and they're very supportive, but they'd certainly rather that I didn't blow the cover.
Yeah. I think that individuals who are thinking about having children need to think about that. Okay. And you need to think about that in terms of maybe before you have those children, you go to therapy, you work through your stuff, then you have the kids so that you don't generate those secrets that your children might write about when they're older.
Years later.
It's called preventative maintenance, if you will, or preventative medicine. So did you, and by the way, what was the title of your first book?
Just fine, thank you.
So when you chose to write it, did you have any hesitation, or did you basically take the position, I have to write this regardless of what the consequences might be?
Let me back up for a minute. That wasn't my first book, but my first books were how-to books.
Mhm.
I wrote a book for teenagers on how to recognize if their parents were alcoholic. And then I had a lot of other how-to general information books. But Just Fine, Thank You was the first one that blew the top off of the family secrets. And the thing about it is, I have always felt like God gave me a special purpose in life, and that purpose was to share information and do what I could to help others. And I love that prayer by St. Francis of Assisi, and I can't even quote it, but where there is hatred, let me sow love.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing has always been my mission. And so the best way to help a million people without actually seeing them was to share my story. That was my thought.
Mm.
And I have had grandmothers and mothers come to me and say, thank you. After I read your book, I knew what was wrong with my child, or I knew what was wrong with my grandchild. And before that, she would never talk to me, but now I know how to talk to her.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, I'm curious as to how your philosophical upbringing formed the processes that you used as you were growing up. I guess the best way to put it is to survive and to be here with us today.
My mother was very, very spiritual. She spent a lot of time reading the Bible, and she was a soloist who sang soprano religious Christian songs around the house all the time. Mm. My dad, even though he was an alcoholic, was very much into politics and deep thinking. And my dad is the one who patted me on the back and said, when you grow up, you can go to college, you can be somebody, you can do something if you want to. And that was in the 50s. Mm. So from that point, I learned, well, I got my politics from my dad and my spirituality from my mom. And I mean, that's where it began. And then I just had a lot of, I don't know, I was an avid reader, and I would read everything I could get my hands on as a child. Because, of course, we didn't have a TV, and our radio was a tube radio. Couldn't listen to that very long because you have to replace the tubes. So there's quite a bit of history in my books, too, talking about this kind of thing.
Well, I would think that I would take it growing up in a small town in, is it North Dakota once again?
South Dakota.
South Dakota. I still haven't understood why they split it, North and South, but hey, what are you going to do? Same thing with North and South Carolina. What are you going to do?
Yep.
But I'm sure it was a small rural town. Is that correct?
Very, yes.
you know,
Small rural town.
and I take it that the main uh, the main work that was available, what, ranching and or farming. I don't know if it was, if you had,
Farming.
yeah,
Yep.
um,
And railroad.
and the railroad and I'll bet you could hear that coming from a mile away.
Yeah, it was South Dakota had a lot of things going on with the railroad back in those days.
And today, are you still living in the same small town, or is it so small?
No,
No.
it's just about gone. I think there's one building left there and it's a
Oh,
post office. So
well,
no,
yeah. I know there's there
move
is a,
away from there so we could go to high school. We
ah,
didn't, our nearest high school was 25 miles away. And my dad wanted to be sure that we had an education. So
mm,
he moved us away from there so we could go to school.
mm.
And
There's a
that,
woman up north there in that area, I think, who bought a town, and she
yes,
is the only resident, and so she is the mayor, and she is the postal. I mean, she's everything.
yes,
But people come and visit, you know.
yep.
So it's very
Mhm.
interesting that people enjoy going, and of course, I'm sure that some of these television programs like Yellowstone hasn't hurt the tourist industry, at least in many of the states. I don't know about South Dakota in that regard, but I know there are a lot of people who want to get away from the city. Some of them want to get off the grid, so they're not going to go to a small town. They're going to literally go out into the woods somewhere, where they can't be found. Do you find that many people, do you find people coming there wanting to get away from it all permanently?
Well, we have Mount Rushmore and
Ah,
Crazy Horse, which are both like 20 miles away from us.
mm-hmm,
So, but our governor opened our state to people during the COVID, and she went on TV, and we have had people just flocking here. I believe we've almost doubled our population since COVID because
mm.
people came here from everywhere because their states were shut down and there was no work, and there was work here, and
Ah,
our state was wide open.
mm,
And the schools were only shut down for a couple of weeks, and at least in our area.
mm-hmm.
So yeah,
So you
a
you
lot
didn't
of people came here and left.
so you didn't have the same experiences that folks in the major metropolitan areas had, where everything was shut down, for an extended period of time, and then people got antsy and said, "No more. I'm not going to sit around and do nothing anymore." You folks were doing what you normally do after a couple of weeks.
We were, except everybody was still wearing masks and keeping their distance. And,
Mm-hmm.
there was quite a lot of fear in the area. There were friends of mine who didn't see their grandchildren for a year, but we didn't do that. We didn't let that affect our family. I told my kids, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die having seen you.
There you go.
And
Yeah.
so we never did that in our family, but some families did.
How about the individualistic attitude, if you will, or bent, if you will, of individuals? Because that was huge shortly after the shutdown. The people just got tired of it and said, "I'm not going to let the government tell me what I'm going to do. I'm going to do what I want to do. I have the First Amendment right." Blah 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 blah. And I would say, how do you weigh your First Amendment right, as you say it, your individual rights, against what it says in the preamble about promoting the general welfare and securing the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity? How do you balance that when it comes to your kids? Now, you took the position and said, "Hey, kids, I want to see. I don't. I'm going to die one day anyway. I've lived a good life. I want to see you." But what about the reverse? What if they were to contract it and that kind of thing? How? And I'm going to back out of that question. Don't answer that question. But I want to ask you the question having to do with the balancing being an individualist versus being compassionate for your family and your community, whether it's COVID or not. Doesn't matter what the issue is.
I believe God is in control.
Mm-hmm.
I was never really afraid of COVID. I did finally catch it after 2 years, sort of toward the end,
Mm-hmm.
but I was never afraid of it. I always believed that God has me firmly in his sights, and my children believe that too. So we didn't really panic or go with the flow. We said our prayers and did our best, and that's all we could do.
Mm. When it comes to the work that you do as, or that you have done as a therapist, working with people through their addictions, and there are all kinds of addictions. It's not just drugs and alcohol. You know, there can be addictions, a workaholic, someone who just can't, who doesn't want to do anything else but work, do their thing, doesn't take time off, and so forth. Um, what has been your experience in regards to your own process of healing? Had you already gone through that before you became a therapist? Or even if you had, did your therapy work with others help you in the process as well?
My therapy work was a God expression in my life. Excuse me, there's a lot of smoke in the air here.
Mm.
My therapy work really helped me to heal. But also, there's never been a time, and even now, that I myself didn't have a therapist. And when I do a workshop, I always tell people attending, if you go to a therapist, ask her, do you have your own therapist? And if they don't go back, because everyone needs guidance and coaching. And if you don't feel like you need that, I mean, maybe you're lucky enough to grow up in the best circumstances, but even at that, you need that to understand other people and have empathy for the people around you. I don't know if I'm answering your question,
Mm-hmm.
but I really strongly believe that God gave me a lot of experiences. You wouldn't believe the stories I've heard. And yet, with all the stories I've ever heard, which some of them are so traumatic and so atrocious, I can relate. And God gave me that.
Mm.
And he put me where I could relate with people.
Well, I'm a firm believer in uh, creating a network of people, friends, family. When you are in need, they will be there to support you. They may not be able to give you everything you want, but like my dear friend who passed away last May, a year ago May, I'd known him for 53 years. We'd went through grade school, high school, and college together, stayed friends throughout. And at one point he called me on the phone. Um, I don't know. I guess it was a cell phone. I can't remember. Anyway, he was telling me that he was living in his car. And so I immediately knew that he probably wanted some money, which I just didn't have. But what I did have was an insight that I believe I was given. And I said, look, you're still living in your hometown. You have a community, you have a network of people that you still are connected to. Now, it happened to be through the church that he was a member of, and not at that time, but prior, and when he was growing up. I said, you need to go to one of them and say, look, I just need a place to stay for until I can get myself back on my feet. And he went to one of his friends, whose name is Bill. And Bill set him up in his garage, made it a room, and closed the garage door, probably locked it and so forth. But it gave him a space to where he could relax, he could recenter, he could refocus, he could look for work, which he did find. He worked for one of those kiosk companies that they have throughout the airports, specifically there at Sky Harbor International Airport. And he was working there right up into his passing. Sometimes that's all we have to give. Sometimes that's all you need is a little advice. My mother, I was sharing with her the story of the stuff that was going on. My mother said to me, Richard, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. Now, if you're calling and you're looking for advice, you're looking for some encouragement, I'm more than happy, but I do not need or want to hear the story. And at first blush, I'm going, I didn't say this. I'm going, Mom, really? The more I thought about it, I realized she was absolutely right. Absolutely right. The story doesn't make any difference. And I'm wondering if that's a good tack to take with people sometimes, because does not that amplify the emotions, the energy, and so forth by continuing to rehash the story, because you're not really letting it go. And no matter speak, you're not letting go and letting God.
I really, because I'm a writer, I like to hear people's stories, and I do listen to them. I think it depends on who you're talking to, who you're working with. I think your mother probably knows you very well, probably knew what was best for you.
Yeah.
A lot of times there are certain clients that I give different advice than I would otherwise, because I can see or think I see what they need, and it usually turns out to be right. And because God made me so empathetic, I can actually stand beside someone and know what they're feeling inside. They don't even have to tell me a lot of times.
Some would call that, they would call you an empath, very empathetic, because you can.
Yes.
My wife is the same way, which can be frustrating sometimes, because
Yes.
I'm not ready yet to share it, but I will. But I'm getting better at that. I'm getting much better at that. You have another book called To Be Somebody. It's a tale of love, heartbreak, and hope. It's about alcoholism and pain, about faith and a higher power and healing of the soul, and about joy and recovery. This question may sound a little strange, but how preachy do you get in your therapy, or do you get preachy at all? And do you know what I mean by that?
Yes. And I don't think so. I share my story and I listen to other people's stories. A lot of times people just need to tell their story and they have it figured out by the time they're done. You don't really need to share much with them at all. But the story of this book is, I wanted to get away from my home because my dad's alcoholism had progressed to a really uncomfortable place. My mother was very codependent, and it just wasn't, I just wanted out of that house. So I married the first guy that asked me, and he turned out to be an alcoholic batterer. Very handsome, in the Air Force. I was blown away by his uniform, and we got to travel all over the world, but he was very abusive to me and my children. And so this book talks about how I got in that trap and how I got out of that trap. And he actually threatened our lives many times, and we were terrified of him often. But that book was written for women in this situation who don't know what to do or who to turn to, and to give them hope. And a lot of people don't understand they're even being abused. I mean, they're so used to it that if you say something to them about their being abused, they would deny it. Not to mention the shame that goes with it. I mean, to find yourself in a position like that is to find yourself full of shame and embarrassment. You don't want anybody to know. So I blew the whistle on abusive marriages and batterers.
I've heard it said in reference to relationships that alcohol will kill the relationship. It might even kill the alcoholic as well as, if we want to use this term, I'm not a believer in victims, but it will also potentially kill the victim, the one who is being abused by the alcoholic. Is that a fair statement to make?
Absolutely. I got away from there, but let me tell you the story of how I got away from there.
Mm-hmm.
I would end up in the hospital physically ill many times, and I had pneumonia 22 times because my physical health was suffering so bad from being abused. I went to the hospital. I called my brother to take my small child and my children and to pick me up from the hospital. And when he picked me up, he said, "Don't ever ask me to help you again. I am done helping you. I am done watching you allow yourself to be treated like this. And if you can't stand up for yourself, I'm done helping you." Mm-hmm. Well, I adored him. I raised him. He was like my child. And he died a month later in a tragic accident. Mm-hmm. And on the way home from the funeral, I said, "I will be somebody. I will go to college. I will do what you want me to do. I will be that woman. I will stand up for myself." And that's what gave me the impetus to get out of there and move on.
And you can say today, I am all those things?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. Now,
I am somebody, but I'm not saying it in a bragging way.
No.
I'm saying it in a way that God made me to be somebody.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that when you wrote your first book, it created a bit of a rift. Sounds to me like another book that you wrote, I think, is rather appropriate, A Fix for Family Rift Caused by Addiction. But but the rift that was created by you writing your first book had nothing to do with addiction directly. But I would take it that this aspect, this particular book can also assist in that process, because the dysfunctional family can be restored and become a healthy family. And this book is complete with explanations and resources that you can take to help your family thrive, which is a word we use all the time. We don't want to just survive anymore. We want to thrive. Talk to us about how you were able to then create this repair, this rift repair, if you will. I think that's pretty cool.
I've been in the addiction field for 45 years. In the beginning, there was nothing for families. Everybody circled around the addict and patted him on the back and gave him lots of attaboys. But there was nothing for the wife and child. And I do workshops that display what happens to the family as this is going on. And I've done them all over the country. I haven't done any for a while because I've been busy writing. However, the thing is, there was nothing for families. And so even when we developed a family program, I worked in a family program working specifically with families. Even that wasn't enough because families would go home empty-handed. So I wrote a book for them to take home with them, to refer to help them know how to navigate this new circumstance of living with somebody who's now not drinking, but may still have a lot of problems. And the family has as many problems as the drinker, and that's what was not recognized widely. It's like, if we fix him, we fixed everybody. That is not true, because by the time you fix him, everybody else is really screwed up.
Well, you use an interesting word here about how the family has been commandeered by the addiction. And that's an interesting word to use. It's similar to pirates commandeering an oil tanker out out off of Somalia somewhere, something along those lines.
Aha.
And it certainly can feel that way. And that's and I guess I suppose one of the ways is to jump ship, you know, to get out. And it sounds to me like that was one of the methods that you chose. That finally at one point you said, I've had enough. I'm done. I'm out of here.
Yep.
How did you, what was it? Can you share with us the process you went through for, again, this is just for you to justify that action saying, this is okay for me to do to jump ship?
You mean when my brother told me that, or earlier, or when I got married to get away from my family?
I would say to get away from your family when you were married and get away from your family.
Okay. I didn't really know what the problem was when I just knew that our family was really toxic, and I didn't even know that word then. I just knew I got to get out of here. I'm going to suffocate. I'm going to die. I can't take this anymore at the age of 17 because it was bad. And the book, Dance Like There's No Tomorrow, is the book I wrote about my teenage years and how bad it was and what happened then. And that's when I started drinking to get away from the pain. And it worked really, really well for a long time. But yeah, I thought if I married this guy, I'm going to have this beautiful life. Everything is going to be wonderful. We're going to travel the world. He's in the Air Force. We got it made. Well, one of the things that we can do as children is develop pie in the sky ideas because we need something to keep us going. If we can't develop our pie in the sky ideas, we would just give up very hopelessly and go into a deep depression. And I think a lot of people do that because they don't have that ability to develop those dreams.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that we talk about here is choices, giving people choices and knowledge of those choices so that they can basically come about developing and creating and having their own dreams, you know. And a lot of times we don't know what choices we have available to us. Did
Oh,
you find that
absolutely.
that was the case for you, that it was like you reached the point where you then had to kind of create the choice for yourself, realize that, oh, wait a minute, there is something else I can do here. And you didn't feel trapped anymore. Because I know that's a lot of how people feel. They feel trapped. And when you feel trapped, you don't feel like you have any options.
Well, as I said, I'm an avid reader.
Mm-hmm.
I read every self-help book I could find. And when I was in the Air Force with my husband for 13 years, every place we would go, I would go to the library and get books on psychology, stacks of books to read to try to help myself figure out what was wrong. And over a period of time, I did get a lot of answers. I really did not still know about alcoholism. And that is one of the main purposes of writing my books, because it is such a sneaky disease and it is so cunning and powerful, and it sneaks up on people and they don't even know it a lot of times. So there's so much denial regarding addiction. Parents will deny that their kids have a problem. Kids will deny that their parents have a problem. Everybody denies that they themselves have a problem until it hits you so hard that it's really pretty late in the game.
Mm. I think one of the sad facts is that, of course, people don't get out of those situations, and they are classified as abusive situations, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And
Yeah.
they don't get out because they don't acknowledge that they have worth and value themselves.
Mm.
It's like I work with a lot of women. I still work with many, many women, and their self-esteem is either never existed or it's been so beaten down that they don't see themselves being really able to stand up for themselves. So to that end, I'm starting a women's advocacy group locally. We're just getting started with it so that somebody can walk beside you and help you to know that you have value, you have worth, and God loves you, and He's got a plan for your life. You just have to help Him fulfill it.
How has the church hindered this process over the years?
Well, I haven't helped. Um,
This is true. This is true.
that's really the kindest thing I can say. But I mean, I was trying to do free workshops at one of our local churches, and the only people who came from out of town, because even though we had 1,500 people in our church, they didn't want to be seen at an addiction workshop because of the shame and the fear. So there hasn't been a lot of tolerance or acceptance. And I'm sorry to say, to me, Christians are really, really detrimental many, many times to recovery. And a lot of people are, they're afraid. I don't know anything about that. I don't want to know anything about that. Or they're afraid that people will find out that they do know a lot about it and they don't want people to know that.
Yeah.
So churches haven't really helped.
Well, I know when I was working for a Christian radio station in Phoenix, I was there for 15 years in the 80s and early 90s. And every time I heard the stories about the churches denying access to certain people, I'm going, you have missed it. The church is for them. All right.
Yep.
If you're already saved, get out, because we need the people who are hurting. And I often think about the definition of true religion. It's taking care of the widows and the orphans. That's the way the definition goes. But obviously, it's taking care of your fellow man and woman and child. That's what true, if you want to put it that way, true religion is. And it broke my heart when I would hear that. I'm going, my God, these people they need somebody to listen to. And so instead of the church opening its arms, they turned to the street. And I'm sure that's where a lot of the homeless people began to come from. They couldn't get any help anyplace else. Their family didn't want to deal with them anymore. They didn't have any job because they lost it because of whatever it was they were going through. And now they're on the street. And now it's even worse because maybe they're into drugs or prostitution or what they refer to today as sex slaves, I guess. I can't think of the other term that they use. Needless to say, it seems to me like because we're starting to break through that stigma in the last few years, especially, people are starting to say, hey, I do need some help. And I've experienced that in my own life. When I was in need of help, I didn't sit there some guy, no, I don't need no help. I'll figure this out. Da, da, da. No, I realized I didn't have the answers. And so I sent out a text, which I should have read a little more closely because it did kind of sound like a scam, one of those that you get in the email or, I really need your help, blah, 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 blah. But I did get the support and the help that I needed. And my wife and I are doing just fine. And so I think that's the other aspect of it too is, again, I think this goes back to what you just talked about. The lack of self-value. I don't deserve the help, so I'm not going to ask.
It isn't even that people put that into words. It's just that the feeling of being so worthless takes over your body and your mind and your soul, and you don't know you have value and worth. There's no way to ask even for the help you need because you're afraid to be laughed at or ridiculed, or you have a lot of fear about you're already being abused or hurt by people, and you're afraid of more hurt and more abuse and more ridicule.
Yeah.
So it's understandable. That's Jesus had to go out and find people. He didn't wait for people to come to him.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. And look at the people he found. Look at the people he found.
I know. And he wasn't fussy. He didn't say, oh, no, you don't measure up.
I still love, there was this one, a former Christian comedian who used to tell the story about the stoning of the woman, and how he would talk to the men and basically this, and then he knelt down, and as the comedian would say, and he was doodling in the dirt. And then he stood up and says, okay, so the first of you who hasn't committed sin, go ahead, throw the first stone. And apparently, I think and the comedian kind of speculates, he implies, he says, what he was doodling in the dirt was the names of these men. It's kind of like a
Oh,
note saying, you want your wives to find out about this? Because most likely, most of them had been with this woman, if in fact that was her, her trade at that time. And of course, he didn't condemn her. He just said, don't do it anymore, And it's just fascinating how, we, this whole aspect of judgment, and it really I would think that for you, first of all, you're not passing judgment. I know this just by virtue of the books you've written and so forth, and what our conversation, that you are blessed by the work that you do and the people that you connect with through this process of, and we'll call it therapy, and through the books as well. And you will not even know the vast majority of people who will read your book, and it will make an enormous difference in their lives. And yet you are going to be and I'm sure you've experienced the blessings over the years.
I definitely have experienced so many blessings. And there's always another one. I'm just constantly, I don't know why I'm amazed by now. You would think I would be used to it, but every time I am amazed at how God comes through. Whatever I need, whatever I ask for, he comes through every time. And I'm always amazed. And I always tell myself, you should be expecting that by now, but I don't.
I think that's the appropriate perspective. Giving what you give without expectation. I think that's the childlike aspect that we've been asked to come to him as little children, without expectation. I think that's just absolutely beautiful. Evelyn Leite, I thank you so much for being a part of Tell Me Your Story and the work that we're doing here through the work that you are doing there in South Dakota,
Thank you, Richard.
your small little hamlet, as it were, and the 19 and I'm sure plus books that you're going to continue writing, I'm sure. And we thank you so much for giving us so much time here on the program.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure to be able to share with you. Thank you so much.
You are very welcome. I do have 3 final questions that I ask all of my guests that I'm going to ask you in just a moment. But first, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. New paradigms for a new world. We're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m. for our special edition of Tell Me Your Story. We are also here Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m. following the news. We're streaming live at those times at richarddugan.com with podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and many other locations, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope you'll subscribe and click notification so that when a new conversation such as this one is posted, you will be notified and you'll be able to tune in and listen in, and I hope be inspired as well as educated and maybe a little entertained. I hope so. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing here financially, we'd be gratefully appreciative. We have a PayPal account. We ask that when they ask you to whom you are sending the support, put in the email address richard@richarddugan.com. That's richard@richarddugan.com. And finally, during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, we ask you to take some time, slow down, stop, pause, and go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice, which Though we didn't necessarily go in that specific direction, I am pretty certain, Evelyn, that you've been doing a lot of listening to that still small voice. And so we encourage you folks to do the same. And with all of that, we now go to our final three questions. And the first of those is to you, who is Evelyn Leite?
I am a person who feels so obligated to God for all the gifts that He has given me that I am trying to give some things back. And to that end, I help everybody in my path. I write books, I do workshops, and I am constantly looking for different ways to be of service.
And EvelynLeite.com is a way, folks, you can connect with her. We'll be linked to that website as well. Our next question, what gets you up in the morning?
Well, I don't get up as fast as I used to. But the first thing I do is thank God that I'm awake and alive and had a good night's sleep. And the next thing I do is read my morning devotions, and then I climb out of bed and do my best the rest of the day.
And finally, what was your best day?
Oh my gosh, I can't even tell you that. I think the most amazing day is when I met Jesus person to person, and my life changed dramatically, because before that I was so angry, so incredibly angry at God that I even joined the God is Dead club for a long time. But I think that was probably the most amazing day, but I've had so many wonderful days. Thank you for asking.
Well, we thank you for being a part of the work we're doing here, and we look forward to hopefully having you back on again to talk about your next chapter / book. So thank you again for being with us, and I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. New paradigms for a new world. We are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal. Jeanette, I'm still listening. Dad, continue to be happy. Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.